Last-minute negotiations are underway in Washington to try to head off a government shutdown. That'll come at midnight Eastern Time if the Senate can't pass a temporary funding bill. The stakes are high. So why is passing such a bill so hard? The CBC's Ellen Mauro is here to answer your questions here on CBC News Network and on our YouTube and Facebook channels. So you can send your questions to Facebook.com/CBC News. That's Facebook.com/CBC News. Okay, so Ellen, what is going on? What is the holdup in the Senate today?
Well, Andrew, the big issue that we've been talking about over the last few weeks are the Dreamers, those undocumented young people who were brought to the U.S. illegally when they were children. Now, that's become a big sticking point in this funding bill discussion. It seems like two separate issues, and it is. But the reason it's coming up now are that the Democrats have a bit of leverage here. The Republicans, in order to get this spending bill passed, they need Democratic senators to vote for it. But the Democrats want some kind of action. They want some kind of protection for the Dreamers to be included in this bill. And they're basically refusing to vote for this bill unless that happens. The Republicans, on the other hand, are saying, look, let's just fund the government now. Let's push this off for another month, and then we'll deal with it in that month. But those two positions between the two sides are really hard to reconcile. And rather than compromise on that, we're really just hearing a lot of blame being tossed back and forth here on Capitol Hill today. And this has been going on for several months. We've had several months of temporary stopgap measures of saying, okay, we'll deal with some of these bigger issues. Let's just keep the government afloat for now. And now it seems that this is the moment where it's all sort of coming to a head.
So a YouTube viewer asks this very basic question, but important one. What does the government shutdown mean?
Well, so the deadline for a funding bill to be passed is midnight tonight. If it isn't passed, we'll start to see non-essential government services close down. So offices, for example, like passport processing, these offices that are deemed sort of non-essential. I live in Washington, D.C. The budget for D.C. is tied to the federal government, so residents here might start to see services shut down, like garbage collection, things like that. Services that are deemed essential, like air traffic controllers and the military, they will continue to work. Those things won't stop. But the longer a shutdown lasts, the more impact it has. For example, on the military, if the shutdown happens and it drags on for more than 2 weeks, servicemen and women could start seeing their paychecks delayed. So at the beginning, this will have a limited impact in terms of day-to-day life, but as it continues, if it were to happen, the impacts will be felt much more dramatically.
Bonnie Miller wants to know how this is relevant to Canada. Do you have a sense of that, Ellen?
Well, it probably won't have an immediate effect on Canada. Of course, I mean, if you're planning a vacation to the United States regarding national parks or landmarks, things like that, it will have an impact on you. But it's, you know, if this were to happen, the government will be pretty much laser focused as much as it can be on the issue of addressing the shutdown. And it will take oxygen away from the discussion of a whole other slew of issues that would affect Canada. You think about the NAFTA negotiations. Now, obviously, they will continue, but you'll have an awful lot of people in Washington who will be more focused on the issue of this government shutdown than other business of the government.
So I'm guessing a YouTube viewer asks, how's this going to impact border crossing? So I'm guessing that U.S. border guards, those are pretty essential. Or could it, the longer it shuts down, could it affect something like that border guards, for instance?
Border guards are considered essential, so that would continue to function. But again, it's the idea of how long, if it were to happen, how long it would last. You know, you would eventually have people going to work and not getting paid. How would that start to affect things? So again, in the beginning, if it were to happen, the impact would be limited, but it is one of those things where the ripple effects of it could potentially be extremely disruptive, but more so for people in the United States, obviously.
So Jack McGuire, he comments, and you can talk about this. I know you can talk about this, Ellen, because you have been. Dreamers and DACA have nothing to do with our budget. I'm pretty sure he means the U.S. budget. So, you know, why is it that we're talking about, we're talking about these so-called Dreamers the budget and a government shutdown. You know, to a lot of Canadians, it doesn't make sense that it all seems to be tied together.
No, it's true. I mean, because there are several issues at play here, and they all are really getting tied together. Now, part of the reason is that both the budget, the funding bill, and addressing the Dreamer situation, both of those things have been kicked down the road several times at this point. So there's frustration that neither have been properly dealt with. On the Dreamers, there's a deadline coming up in March. So the Democrats see this moment, again, as a moment of leverage where they have power, they could force a shutdown, and they're saying, look, let's get this addressed and not push this off any further. But again, the Republicans are saying we don't have a fix for that yet. So you're holding up funding the government on something that there isn't, from the Republican view, the widespread Republican view, a solution on at this point. And that's why at this point, as the hours go on, it does seem like a shutdown is more and more likely. But there was a major development just a short time ago with Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, heading off to the White House to talk about all of this with President Trump. And we could see some movement as a result of that meeting, but we're certainly not seeing much movement here on Capitol Hill.
Lauren Hamu asks one question with one word: Russia ? In other words, I guess Lauren is asking, could this affect the investigation into Russian collusion in the 2016 presidential election?
It shouldn't. Again, this would be a distraction from it, but Robert Mueller's investigation would continue to be funded. It would continue to keep going. So that would push ahead. And of course, that always is the constant background story here in Washington. You have governmental things happening, but that is something always in the background, and it would continue to go ahead in the case of a shutdown.
Just final question to you, Ellen. Do you have a sense of, is this going to happen? What are you hearing on the Hill? Is this likely to happen, that at midnight the government is going to shut down, or is it just too hard to tell?
It's becoming more and more likely as time goes by. You know, we've seen senators coming back and forth, coming and giving interviews, and it does appear increasingly likely, again, because there just aren't the numbers right now to get this passed in the Senate. Those 60 votes to get this passed just don't exist at this point. So unless something comes out of this meeting between Chuck Schumer and Donald Trump at the White House, it does appear a shutdown could be likely. The White House this morning gave it a 50-50 chance, and right now on the Hill, you can bet most eyes are on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, trying to see what's going to come out of this meeting between, you know, two New Yorkers, Donald Trump, Chuck Schumer, two deal makers. Let's see what they can do. But if they can't do anything, the shutdown does appear increasingly likely as time goes by.
All right, Ellen, thank you very much. We have to leave it there, but for our Facebook audience, Ellen will continue answering your questions. That's at facebook.com/CBC News.
Hi everyone. Thank you for watching online on Facebook and YouTube on our CBC Facebook page. I'm just unhooking myself from my TV setup, but we're here to take your questions on this looming government shutdown here in the United States if there isn't some movement in Congress this afternoon. So please continue to post your questions and comments on Facebook and on YouTube, and I'd be happy to take any questions that anyone has. We have a question now from John Brain saying, Republican-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, Republican president. The Republicans will own this. They may not think they will, but they will. And that is certainly a sentiment that we're hearing a lot in Washington. It's a very rare thing that you would have a government shutdown when you have one party in control of all the branches of government. It certainly hasn't happened. I mean, the last shutdown was 4 years ago. But at that point, you had Barack Obama in the White House, and Republicans were in control of the House, Democrats in the Senate. So, yeah, this is a really rare thing, and certainly that's why we're seeing, you know, a lot of Republicans trying to shift that blame, saying, you know, that might be true. We might be in control of all of these levers of government, but we still need some Democratic support, given they need 60 votes. And just to give you a sense of that blame game going back and forth, Republican lawmakers are trying to dub this the Schumer shutdown, referring to the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. So, as you say, Republicans are in control of government, but the blame game is being tossed back and forth from both sides. We have a few more questions and comments coming in. This one from Wayne Coolidge comments, I don't think it'll last more than 2 weeks. We'll have to wait and see. Certainly the last government shutdown back in September 2013, that did last about 2 weeks. The longest shutdown the U.S. has seen lasted 3 weeks. The longer a shutdown continues, the more the impact is felt, the more the ripple effects of it are felt. But, you know, we still have, it's 2 o'clock, we still have about 10 hours to see if this can be avoided. A question from a YouTube viewer: how will this affect rail services like Amtrak? I don't have specifics on that. Certainly if they're employees of the government, if they're considered non-essential, they will, those offices will shut down. I can't comment too specifically on the Amtrak though. A YouTube viewer. Actually, I'm going to take this question from Andrew. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong. Ouvre, what initiated the shutdown? Well, this has been a debate that's been going on for a long time. Really, over the last 4 or 5 months, we've seen this game of sort of kicking the can down the road. We've seen Congress pass what are called continuing resolutions, and basically that means they're passing these temporary spending bills that keep the government funded for a month or a few months as they try to work out some of these bigger issues and reach a compromise in order to pass a proper budget that would fund the government for an entire year. So because there hasn't been compromise in order to actually do that, we've just seen these stopgap measures. But because this has been going on for such a long time now, this is all coming to a head, and you're getting the sense on Capitol Hill that if it's not going to get passed now, it has to. And that's why there's a lot more pressure this time around, because there's a frustration that it's dragged on for so long. Neil Nemeth asks, why is the president so quiet? Well, Donald Trump, plays a big role in trying to bring about, the president, I should say, plays a big role in trying to bring about deals on Capitol Hill. Now, what we've heard from Donald Trump over the last few days is a bit of a blame game, trying to put this on the Democrats, saying the Democrats want this shutdown, talking about the negative impact it will have. And that is something we're hearing from the Democratic side as well, trying to blame the president and blame this shutdown on the fact that there's been no deal reached on immigration. They're also talking about that infamous meeting at the White House last week where some choice language was used by the president to describe certain countries, pointing to that meeting as a failure to reach a deal on immigration, as all contributing to this issue. But we did have a bit of an olive branch from the president this morning to Chuck Schumer, the top Democrat in the Senate, inviting Chuck Schumer down to the White House to try to talk about what's happening and try to reach some kind of resolution. And that could potentially be a really major development if those two men who have met privately before on other issues, on this issue as well, can reach some kind of deal. That could create some movement here, and that's really needed, because there isn't a lot of compromise happening, at least publicly, on Capitol Hill. So that could potentially be a big move from the president, and we'll have to just wait and see what comes out of it. Augusta V asks, will this cause another election? No, it won't. U.S. governments don't fall on budget negotiations like this in the way that some others do. So that's one thing that we can say for sure at this point in a very fluid situation. Ryan Kenny asks, does this shutdown affect international relations in any way? It shouldn't have much of an impact in terms of international relations, in terms of diplomatic relations, in terms of NAFTA negotiations that are upcoming, but certainly it will be a major focus for all politicians, for the government as a whole, if it were to happen. So in a way that a distraction can get in the way of other things, it would have somewhat of an impact. But in terms of the general business of international relations, it shouldn't have too much of an effect. We're getting a lot of questions of people asking about how this will affect Canada. Certainly if you have a vacation planned in the U.S., potentially at a national park, this could have an impact on you. Border crossings should be relatively ineffective. Air traffic controllers will remain in place, but you could expect certain delays, particularly the longer this goes. If it lasts a few days, it probably won't have a massive impact, but if it lasts 2 weeks, for example, like the last government shutdown did, then the ripple effects of it tend to spread. But, you know, it's really sort of a wait and see situation, but it shouldn't have too much of an impact on Canada. Just waiting for a few more questions to come in on Facebook and YouTube in terms of where we're at with this looming shutdown. We're about 10 hours away from the deadline, and I think we're getting one more here from just a few more notes coming in. But just in terms of one of the issues that are kind of, that you've probably heard a lot about, but we haven't actually talked a lot about in this Facebook Live, that's the issue of the Dreamers. Now, the Dreamers are 800,000 young people living in the United States who were brought here illegally by their parents as children. And they've become a major sticking point in this whole situation. Now, that might sound strange because you're hearing about passing a funding bill to fund the government, a spending bill. So why is immigration being tied up in this? Well, it's because the Democrats see this as a moment of leverage. They have power. They can force a government shutdown if they don't get on side with the Republicans. The Republicans don't want a shutdown on their watch. There's a deadline in March coming up for some protections for the Dreamers. That program will expire in March, so a lot of pressure on this moment to get something done, and that's why you're hearing this issue of the Dreamers being tied to this spending bill. What's interesting, and perhaps it's a bit of a telltale sign of what Washington is like, most people in both parties want to do something to protect the Dreamers, but it's really hard to reach an actual deal on it in terms of the details. So even when people agree on things here, it can be very hard to reach an actual compromise. Okay, everyone, I'm going to have to wrap it up there to do a live report on CBC News Network. Please tune into our coverage the rest of the day. It's a very fluid situation. Again, we're waiting to see what comes out of that meeting at the White House with Chuck Schumer and President Trump. Could potentially be some movement there. If there isn't, we are drawing close to a government shutdown. Again, the deadline is about 10 hours away. Keith Bogue will have more on the story tonight on CBC The National. And thank you so much for tuning in.